Welcome to Trails Worth Hiking, the show that brings you some of the most interesting backpacking and trekking routes in the world. I'm your host, Jeremy Pendry. In the first part of the show, we bring you the story and history of a trail. Then we tell you what it's like to hike the trail and how you can do it. On this episode, we go back to the desert, where on a multi-day hike, we'll descend one of the longest continuous slot canyons in the world, where we'll pass miles and miles of unique formations and undulating sandstone walls, some with ancient petroglyphs. We'll descend rock and log jams created by flash floods, wade desert water pools, and maybe even avoid quicksand, as we travel down Buckskin Gulch in the Paria Canyon Vermilion Cliffs Wilderness in southern Utah. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm excited to have Glenn Van Pesky on the show. Glenn is a legend in the ultralight backpacking industry. He's the founder of Gossamer Gear. When I hiked the Tahoe Rim Trail in 2009 and the John Muir Trail in 2011, I slept on an ultralight Gossamer Gear closed-cell foam torso pad to keep me warm at night. And beneath that, I had a 1/8 inch pad that went the entire length of my body. One of my hiking companions on those trips, Cameron Kennedy, I believed used a Gossamer Gear Gorilla Sil Nylon pack on both hikes, if I remember correctly. In any event, my memory of Gossamer Gear goes way back into my early ultralight backpacking days. Glenn has written a book that describes his lightweight backpacking philosophy, but also how that dovetails with his philosophy on life, which he and I discussed before talking about Buckskin Gulch, our featured trail. His book is called Take Less, Do More. Glenn is a fantastic person to talk about Buckskin Gulch with because he has hiked the canyon numerous times, which is rare among most guests on the show who have typically hiked a trail only once. He even hiked Buckskin Gulch with Matthew McConaughey. If that's not a teaser to buy the book, I don't know what is. We don't talk about his experience with Matthew McConaughey in the interview because I didn't want it to be about that, but it's in the book. So get the book and check it out. And we may actually get some signed copies to give away of the book, but I don't have them yet, so no promises. If I get some, I'll announce it through Instagram. But before getting into our conversation with Glenn, let's do our Walking the Walk segment where we highlight listeners who have hiked a trail after listening to an episode about it and either learned about it through the show or were inspired by the show. We have several Walking the Walk reports this time. First is Harry Kirsch, who hiked the Laugavegur Trail in Iceland, which we covered in episode 41. He listened to the episode with Nadine Slavinsky, and she gave a thorough and informative description of the trail and piqued his curiosity. And 2 years later, he was able to do the trek with his 3 adult sons. And he said the Laugavegur did not disappoint. The views were stunning, the geography was unique, and they had pretty good weather throughout. There's a few points he thought were worth emphasizing. One, be ready to reserve the moment bookings open up. Glenn actually talks about that issue for Buckskin Gulch as well. On any popular trail, that's the way it's going to have to be, which is to be online and ready to jump when the date and time for permits opens up. Second, they used a company called South Coast Adventures to send a duffel bag ahead. So they essentially had a partial luggage transfer where they were able to send one duffel bag ahead to put extra food, clothes, and power banks in the duffel bag. Third, they slept at Landmannalaugar the night before the trek. So when they got to the trailhead, they essentially spent an extra day and did some hiking there, and Harry recommends that. And finally, Harry said, don't be fooled by the fact that 3 of the 4 days have elevation decreases. There's still plenty of up and down in between. And that includes muddy and rocky ascents. Overall, he had a terrific experience. Second, I want to highlight Emma Leitauler, who hiked the Kaiserkrone in Austria in the Alps, which we covered in episode 35. She was inspired by the episode to go do it, and she had a fantastic 5-day hike combined with a visit to Salzburg and Munich. She went with the Brighton Outdoor Society from Brighton, England, which is a meetup group that she runs. So congratulations to Emma and the Brighton Outdoor Society for completing the Kaiserkrone. Third, I want to highlight Helena Guzik, who hiked the Kumano Kodo in Japan, which we covered in episode 25. She was researching and thinking about the hike, but found that the episode convinced her that it was feasible to do as a solo female traveler. So I'm glad we were able to convince her to get out there. And she said the route had been on her bucket list for a long time since she had hiked some other pilgrimage routes like the Camino de Santiago and the Via Francigena. She actually did her PhD on early modern European pilgrimages and art, so the Kumano Kodo as a pilgrimage route was right up her alley, even though not European. Anyway, she said the experience exceeded expectations, so congrats to Helena for completing the Kumano Kodo. And finally, I want to highlight Lisa Barrett, who completed the Tour du Mont Blanc, which we covered in episode 22. And she went with her 4 sons. So there we have a theme maybe where Harry Kirsch went with his 3 adult sons. Lisa went with her 4 adult sons. And they went with a childhood friend as well. What's really cool about this is that Lisa had never done more than a day hike here and there in her life and lives in Southwest Florida where her daily walks are flat. Yet she was determined to do this really tough multi-day hike through the Alps, and it worked out, and she completed it. She said the scenery, the huts, the food, everything about the trip exceeded expectations. It was the trip of a lifetime, and now she says it's the start of a new family tradition. To point out how much that is true, she has since, in 2025, hiked the West Highland Way. She did the Tour de Mont Blanc in 2024. And now they're planning to do the Camino Primitivo as well. And she says, and this couldn't be more true, it seems that when one hike ends, the planning for the next begins immediately. Yes, Lisa, that is something we are all afflicted with. All right, so those are some fantastic Walking the Walk reports. Thank you for those. As you all know, that is what keeps me going. That is what makes the show worth doing. I love that you're actually getting out there and doing these amazing hikes. All right, let's switch now to Buckskin Gulch. So why am I doing an episode on a slot canyon in southern Utah? Over my lifetime, I spent quite a bit of time in the American Southwest and quite a bit of time in deserts, but I've never done a backpacking trip in a slot canyon. There's a couple of reasons for this, and I want to be honest about this. One, which Glenn actually says as well in the conversation, is that I generally prefer high mountains and generally end up backpacking in alpine settings. But here's where I need to be a little honest. I'm a little unsure about the safety of slot canyons, and they scare me a little bit, both from a flash flooding perspective and the other hazards and difficulties of hiking in this environment. It's not typical trail hiking, and for someone who hikes a lot of mountain trails, that can be intimidating. Anyway, I want to get over that fear, and I do want to hike some of these slot canyons. So I jumped at the opportunity to talk about one of the longest slot canyons in the world, and the opportunity to have Glenn demystify slot canyons a bit. Having done this interview and another interview I'll share soon on a different canyon in a near future episode, little teaser there, I'm eager to give slot canyons a shot. Before we jump into talking about Buckskin Gulch, I do want to mention that Glenn talks about a good resource for this trail called Hiking and Exploring the Paria River, a book by Michael Kelsey. You can find it on Amazon. I'll put a link in the show notes so that you can grab that book if you want to learn more. All right. So I've said Buckskin Gulch is one of the longest slot canyons in the world. It's also one of the deepest. You know, I did some research trying to figure out whether it is in fact the longest and really couldn't get confirmation of that. There are other long slot canyons, but Buckskin Gulch is certainly one of the longest. It's over 16 miles long, so about 26 kilometers. It's a tributary to the Paria River, which is a tributary of the Colorado River. So all of this flows into the Colorado. Let's talk for a minute about what a slot canyon is, though. This is a long, narrow channel or drainage way with sheer rock walls. Typically, they're made of eroded sandstone or limestone. As far as the definition goes, the depth to width ratio is at least 10 to 1, but they can be up to 100 to 1. What that translates to in ordinary English is that these are very narrow and very deep. Flash flooding in slot canyons is a feature, not an exception, not a freak incident. It's part of the ecosystem. Slot canyons are found all over the world, typically in arid regions like deserts. They're particularly well known in the southwestern United States, but they're also in the Pyrenees along the Spain-France border and in the Blue Mountains of Australia near Sydney. Southern Utah has the densest population of slot canyons in the world with over 1,000 of them. Not surprisingly, northern Arizona, which is just next to southern Utah, also has a high concentration of them. And Death Valley in California has them too. And that's another teaser for the episode we'll have coming up. There are a number of hazards in hiking in slot canyons. There's potential flash flooding. You can fall and get hurt. There's a lot of unstable debris that can fall, like rocks and trees. There could be unsteady or slippery terrain. There could be quicksand, which we'll talk about with Glenn, and numerous other hazards, many of them water-related. Another problem is that rescue can be difficult in a narrow, deep canyon, which can up the stakes for problems that occur. So let's talk about the thing that's on my mind and on most people's minds with slot canyons, and that's the flash floods. Rain can happen many miles away and not fall at all where you are, yet a massive wall of moving water and debris can form and strike with little warning. So the bottom line is to stay out of a slot canyon if there is any sign of rain in the surrounding area. And the surrounding area should be considered a broad surrounding area, many, many miles. Desert rains are particularly dangerous because although it doesn't rain often, when it does rain, it can rain really hard. And desert soil often doesn't absorb water well, which can increase runoff. In addition, because rain is so rare in desert environments, there may not be good human-built infrastructure to handle runoff. And as Glenn says in our conversation, it's the debris that can be most deadly. And that is often, again, due to the lack of regular rain to clear out debris. So rain happens infrequently, but it happens all at once. And in slot canyons, the fact that they are narrow and deep makes it harder to avoid the water and debris. So with all these risks in a slot canyon, why are we talking about it? Why do this? Well, have you seen the photos? These are stunning, otherworldly landscapes. Glenn did the hike with a group that included, as I mentioned before, Matthew McConaughey. But it also included a writer named Ali Salim, who wrote an article for Outside Magazine. And on seeing the canyon for the first time, he said, quote, "They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. If I write 1,000 or 10,000 or even 100,000 words, they would not begin to capture the beauty and wonder and spirituality and complexity and triumph that is Buckskin Gulch." So there you go. That's what you're in for. All that said, it's actually not obvious that slot canyons are more dangerous for backpackers than high elevation alpine terrain. Alpine terrain, as most of you know, has numerous risks, including exposure to severe weather, lightning, hypothermia, heat exposure, and of course, altitude sickness, all of which carry real risks if not managed properly and if you make bad decisions as risks present themselves. So I'm obviously not trying to scare people away from either of these environments, just pointing out that they both have their concerns. And for me, slot canyons and the risks they pose are just less familiar, and I don't have experience with them, so they seem more scary. Whether they actually are, I don't really know. Let's talk about the flora and fauna of this region. There are a lot of raptors like eagles, falcons, and hawks. There are a variety of other birds like swifts and swallows and wrens that live in these canyons. There are different kinds of ducks. As far as mammals go, there are mule deer, there are bighorn sheep, as Glenn will mention. There are bobcat, mountain lion, porcupine, beaver, coyote, jackrabbit, cottontail rabbit, squirrels, and other rodents. The bighorn sheep were actually reintroduced in the 1980s. They are native to the area, but had to be reintroduced. As far as reptiles and amphibians, there are rattlesnakes. There's chuckwalla, which is a pretty fat lizard. I saw one of those when I was in Red Rock Canyon in Nevada recently. Chuckwalla is an interesting looking lizard. There's other types of lizards. There's the red-spotted toad, and the Paria River has several species of fish. Even though it's a desert environment, of course, there are plants. Near the river, there are sedges, which are grass-like. There are reeds, there are horsetails, and other smaller plants that grow near water. There are trees and bushes like willow, cottonwood, tamarisk, and ash. As Glenn will discuss, there are petroglyphs in Buckskin Gulch, which are rock etchings by native peoples. The native peoples who lived there, the earliest that we know about, were Puebloan peoples, believed to have inhabited the area between 200 and 1200 AD. They hunted deer and bighorn sheep, and in the lower ends of the canyon, which are wider, they grew corn, beans, and squash, so they were early agriculturalists. But by 1200, they abandoned their settlements in southern Utah and migrated south to what are now Arizona and New Mexico. Paiute peoples came later and were the inhabitants of the area when Europeans arrived. The Southern Paiutes are a federally recognized tribe. Like Puebloans, they are also farmers and hunters. They were semi-nomadic, following game and plant harvests, and lived in small groups of several families. After contact with the Spanish, unfortunately, they were subject to being trafficked as slaves to other tribes. Then later Mormons settled in their territory, and eventually they were put into reservations. They lost a lot of even that limited land when their federal recognition was terminated in the 1950s, though it was restored in 1980. They are today comprised of 5 separate bands, though they come together annually at their annual restoration gathering. The first documented Europeans were 2 priests from the Dominguez Escalante expedition in 1776. They were trying to find a route from Santa Fe, New Mexico to Monterey, California, which they were unsuccessful in completing, though they did provide the first European description of the area and its peoples. And although they didn't make it all the way to Monterey, the route and info they gathered later became the first part of the Old Spanish Trail, which did go all the way to California, though to Los Angeles rather than Monterey. Later in the 19th century, there were gold prospectors, and even later, other minerals have been sought in the area, like uranium. The Paria Canyon Vermilion Cliffs Wilderness is 112,500 acres in southern Utah and northern Arizona. It's on the Colorado Plateau, which we've talked about, I believe, in the Grand Canyon episode. The wilderness area was created in 1984 and includes the Vermilion Cliffs Monument created by President Clinton in 2000. Both of these are managed together by the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. I don't remember if we talked specifically about what the BLM is and does, but it manages about 250 million acres of U.S. federal land. Much of the land that BLM manages was originally considered undesirable land, but today it manages more than 220 wilderness areas, numerous national monuments, and numerous other protected areas, such as wild and scenic rivers, and even national scenic and historical trails, which and I'm sure you appreciate it as well. That said, it also manages mineral extraction and grants oil and gas leases, so not all the work it does is protection, but protection is a big part of what it does. All right, so that's some background on Buckskin Gulch and the area it's in. Before we jump into the conversation with Glenn Van Pesky, I want to remind you to buy your backpacking meals from our sponsor, Outdoor Herbivore. Outdoor Herbivore makes delicious, filling, and easy-to-use vegetarian and vegan backpacking meals, though as I always say, you don't need to be a vegetarian or a vegan to enjoy these meals. They're just delicious backpacking meals. You can get 10% off your order using the discount code TWH10P, TWH10P, like Trails Worth Hiking 10%, to get 10% off your order at Outdoor Herbivore at outdoorherbivore.com. I recently got back from a trip in the Sierra, and I ate Outdoor Herbivore meals every night for dinner, as I always do when I go backpacking. And you can too with a discount at outdoorherbivore.com. They ship worldwide, so wherever you are, you can get Outdoor Herbivore meals. In addition, they sell bulk ingredients if you want to make your own meals using, for example, the dried instant rice or bean flakes or other ingredients. Outdoor Herbivore at outdoorherbivore.com. I also want to remind you of 2 possible adventures next year that you can put on your radar. I've talked about them before, and I will talk about them again. But the first one is the Highlander event in Big Bear Lake, California, June 23rd to June 27th, 2026. I gave a full review of my experience at the 2025 Highlander in the last episode, the Teton Crest Trail episode. So check that out if you want to hear my views on Highlander. The bottom line is I think it's a great event and a great way to meet lots of like-minded people and have a great hike. You can get 20% off your registration for the June 2026 Highlander event. Make a week of it, head out to Southern California and enjoy the beautiful mountain weather in the San Bernardino Mountains and meet lots of really cool people on the Highlander. The discount code for listeners is TWH20, Trails Worth Hiking 20. And finally, I want to remind you once again of our Trails Worth Hiking Adventures Earthbound Expeditions collaboration, where Earthbound Expeditions will be guiding and leading a trip to the Annapurna Base Camp in Nepal in October 2026. The trip is very affordable. It'll be under $1,500. I believe the price is $1,487 for an entire 2 weeks in Nepal. Of course, you do have to pay for your own plane ticket on top of that. But that is a very affordable price for 2 weeks of absolutely fantastic adventure in the Himalayas. If you have questions about it, reach out to me at trailsworthhiking@gmail.com or reach out to Rajan Simkata and his team at Earthbound Expeditions at earthboundnpl@gmail.com. We've had a lot of interest over the last month in this trip, and people are putting down their deposits now. So sign up now, get your deposit down, and put it on the books and be ready to go to Nepal next October. I will be going. Friend of the show, Tony Wong, has already paid his deposit, so he will be going. It should be a fantastic chance to learn a lot about the culture of Nepal and to do some fantastic hiking in the Himalayas. All right. With all that said, let's jump into my conversation with Glenn Van Pesky about Buckskin Gulch. Glenn Van Pesky, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
You are a pioneer in ultralight backpacking gear, but from reading your book, it seems like at the beginning that wasn't your intention. Could you talk a little bit about the origins of Gossamer gear?
Well, it just started because when our oldest son, Brian, got into scouts, they loaded us up at REI with all the traditional kind of heavy stuff. And some of these kids were pretty small and, it was a struggle for them. So luckily my mom taught me how to sew. She thought every kid should know how to cook, bake, and sew. And so all three of us actually do that on a regular basis to this day. So I started sewing gear just to make it lighter. And then it, kind of got out of hand.
So what is your involvement with the company today? I mean, my experience, I bought gear from Gossamer Gear, I don't want to say 15 or 20 years ago, but I know that you're sort of in a semi-retired position now.
I always worked full-time as a civil engineer, so it was always a side thing. Currently, I still do some designing. The Whisper tent is something I came up with for a bikepacking trip that, actually made it into a product. Many of the things I come up with, we get together with the product team, and the first question is, okay, are there 5 other people besides Glenn who think this is a good idea? And oftentimes the answer is like, probably not. So those products never come out. So I'm still tinkering. I'm still a part owner, and I'm kind of managing board member.
Well, thank you for all the work you've done in this industry. It's been an enormous help to me to have people like you out there getting this kind of gear to market, because when I started getting into ultralight backpacking, there really weren't that many companies that were actually selling it. And now you can get fairly light equipment at places like REI, though I think the best stuff is still sold through more cottage industry type companies. But it's great that you've been in this space for so long.
Well, and it's amazing how many cottage manufacturers there are.
Yep.
And they tend to come and go somewhat, but you look at garage grown gear and the listings there are just phenomenal compared to, like you said, in the early days, it was kind of like, there's 3 or 4 of us kind of tinkering around, and those were your options.
Well, thank you for sending me your book, Take Less, Do More. I really enjoyed it. And the thing that I enjoyed the most is I just identified with so many of the principles that you set forth. And I think that's probably not a surprise for someone who's also been an advocate for ultralight backpacking. But it was really great to read so many things and say, yeah, that's how I feel about these things. So I thought we'd go through a few of the concepts you talked about in the book so that we can share those concepts with the listeners. One of the things that you talked about is the value of connecting with community. And so we're going to be talking about a backpacking trip, and that's not always something that people associate with community. The backpacking hobby is not always associated with community, but I think you see travel and hiking as being congruent with community and helping you develop community in other ways in your life. So I want to hear about that and how that led to a job as a dishwasher.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, backpacking offers a number of important things, I think. I don't know if you've read The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter.
I haven't, but I'm aware of it. Yeah, I've heard of that book.
And his second book, Scarcity Brain. It's so more and more studies are showing, things have never been better, but people are more anxious and depressed than ever. And it turns out, the best way around that is getting outside, away from the screens, away from all the comforts of modern life and challenging ourselves and doing hard things. But also it can be valuable in building community. There's a cool article I read, I want to say Wall Street Journal, New York Times, on these people that moved to Brooklyn and they didn't know any neighbors. And they said, well, we're just going to have our front coffee on the sidewalk Sunday morning and see what happens. And it grew to this huge, it was a slow start. People were like, what are you doing? And, they got to meet their neighbors, and one of them's like super coffee guy. So he starts supplying the coffee, and, pretty soon they got 20, 30 people gathering, and they create events and fund these things and support things. And it's a super cool story about creating community. And we have something like that here in a smaller sense. Thursdays are Growler Thursdays at our house in Bend. Mm-hmm. Any of the neighbors Thursday afternoon that want to hang out, just wander down the alley with a beer and sit and hang out. And, sometimes it's a couple people. And I think last week we had 10 or 12 rolling through and catching up on what people are doing. And so, creating community can be simple, but, you have to start somewhere. And I think as far as the dishwashing, I think a lot of people, when they think about retirement, they miss an important aspect. And I know I got some good advice before I retired from my engineering career. And that was, which I always pass on, is don't say yes to anything for the first year. Mm-hmm. Because, you don't know what your retirement life is going to look like. And everyone who knows that you retired thinks, oh, great, he's got 40 or 60 hours a week now that he can work on my pet projects or things I'm trying to get done. And so, take it slow for the first year and see how you want to build retirement. But I think a lot of people think when they're thinking about retirement, they think about the things about work that they don't like that are going to go away. Mm-hmm. And, it could be a long list, meetings and monthly reports you have to do, expense reports, difficult people, commutes. I mean, there can be all sorts of things you don't like about work, and you're excited about those going away. But I think people fail to think about the good things about work because those are also going to go away. Mm-hmm. Generally, if you're retiring, you're maybe top of your career, you're providing value, you're a trusted source. People are coming to ask you your advice. You're part of a team working towards shared goals. Sometimes in some organizations, you've worked with those people for decades, built relationships, done things with them outside of work. And all those go away also when you step out the door. Mm-hmm. And so the dishwashing for me was, it definitely wasn't on my radar when I retired to get another job. And actually, I just worked this Saturday. I work very infrequently now. One, because we're gone a lot. But, I was hired to fill a specific spot for, a few months. But it scratches that itch of being part of a community, the adrenaline, it was a long weekend this Saturday. The place was slammed. There was a line out the door. There were 3 of us washing dishes and we could barely keep up. So yeah, it's fun.
I love it. You make dishwashing sound really fun. Talk a little bit about how that dovetails with the idea of the list. Now, the list is this idea of putting together a list of names of people who might go backpacking with you so that you have a group that goes, and we'll talk about how that connects to Buckskin Gulch as well. But I'm interested in the concept, and it seems like another way that you're out there trying to create community.
Yeah, and I kind of stole this idea from John Mackey, the co-founder of Whole Foods Market, and also my business partner in Gossamer Gear. He has a lot of interesting friends. As you might imagine, a lot of them are, high net worth individuals kind of in his circles, but not always, because a lot of friends that he met through hiking the Appalachian Trail. And so they run the gamut. And the common threads are really that they're good company. They're usually good at what they do, and they're, kind of passionate about life and other people. And so I've worked, actually being married to Francie for 43 years, a couple weeks ago, has been good for me as an introvert. I'm not naturally I'm happy with my own company, but I realize that life is richer with other people in life. Mm-hmm. And so I'm getting better at, kind of talking to strangers, as it were. So Francie and I have both been invited, and I've been invited on some backpacking trips with John Mackey. And he basically has a long list of people and, invites a bunch of them, whoever can make it, on a trip. And sometimes it's a backpacking trip on a trail, real backpacking. And sometimes it's a kind of a different trip, traveling through Europe or hiking the Alpe Adria Trail, which if you haven't done one on that, would be a great trail definitely a trail worth hiking.
Okay. I have not heard of that one, and I saw that you had done that, and that seemed interesting to me, so I'll have to look into that one.
Yeah, it's a newish trail. I think they recently celebrated their 10-year anniversary, but you start at a glacier in Austria and you hike through the Austrian Alps and then through Slovenia and then through Italy down to the Adriatic Sea. So it's like from the glacier to the ocean and all the cool experiences in between. But so that was a John Mackey trip. And so the cool thing about it is, one, after 20 years of being on Mackey trips, this is a revolving cast of characters. And so I know a lot of them and have gone on to do trips with some of those. But usually he's always adding to the list. So, if I go on a trip, there's usually someone new that I haven't met and that I get to meet. And the thing about trips that involve days and days of doing not much but walking is you really have time to get to know people. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is something that thru hikers know well. The people they meet the summer they do a thru hike, are some of their closest friends. They've shared so much stuff. They've had time to talk with things about probably that they haven't talked with maybe anyone else in their life. The barriers come down, you got nothing to prove. And so with that in mind, I kind of created the list, which is currently about 100 people that I've met through, sometimes it's through podcasts, sometimes it's through emails, sometimes it's in person at events. Mm-hmm. They meet three basic criteria. The first is they're good company in the backcountry. Sometimes people are nice, and then when you take away the convenience of modern life, they're not so nice anymore. You realize they can't handle, a little suffering. So that's an important aspect. Secondly, is that they have their gear kind of figured out. It's typically not trips for first-time backpackers. I mean, that's great, but I don't have the patience for that. So it's not really about that. And then the third is that they have some general level of physical fitness. Mm-hmm. It just makes the trip more enjoyable for them. And I can fudge a little on this with the trip if I have a bunch of people that aren't quite as fit as others. But generally, those are the three criteria. The first one's non-negotiable, the good company. And my shorthand for that is people who have something to say but nothing to prove.
Yeah.
They've led interesting lives, which I find if you have time to talk to people, is most people. And it doesn't have to be about them. They're interested in other people. They're happy to talk about things they've experienced and how they think about things, but they're also interested in how other people think about things and what they've done in life. So
I want to talk about one more concept from the book, and then we'll jump into Buckskin Gulch.
Okay.
One thing you said in the book that really struck me that I think will be counterintuitive for a lot of the people who listen to this podcast in particular is to reduce the number of goals you have and the benefits of that. What do you mean by that, and how do you see that as a good thing to do?
Well, this is one of the great things about backpacking for, say, 3 or more days is life is boiled down to the essential. The only things you really need to think about are, where's the next water and where am I spending the night? And so, It gives your mind a chance to wander and think about things, think about people, or think about nothing. Just kind of zen out. And in typical life in the front country or cotton world, I was on some podcasts, they call it the cotton world, which,
Okay.
which I like. Probably doesn't mean anything if you're a backpack, cotton kills, and like the
Right.
cotton world is the world where you wear cotton. So
Yeah.
I thought it was clever. Not everyone would get it, but yeah, in the cotton world, we're constantly bombarded. We had a to-do list with like a million things on it, and trying to focus that energy and make time for the things that are important, like relationships, but maybe aren't crying for attention. And so one of the ways of kind of bringing that back is that experience from backpacking back into life is trying to reduce the number of goals and just say, similarly when you're backpacking, it's like, okay, I need to get water at the next spring, and I think I'm going to be camping about here. Start the day with like, okay, what are the what's the water and campsite things I need to get done today?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I can fit other things in, that's great. But, what are the things that need to happen today? I need to get water and I need to find a campsite when you're backpacking. What are the two things and maybe they're, I really need to call my dad, or I need to reach out to someone that's been on my mind. And I need to make sure I do that today. That's my find the water today.
Yeah, I love that concept. And when you're backpacking, the most important thing is just figuring out how to get from point A to point B. And sometimes that's it. That's all you've got on your mind for the day.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to think about life that way as well. That's really a great way to think about things. Why don't we switch now to talking a little bit about Buckskin Gulch? And it seems like a really interesting slot canyon hike. How did you come to do Buckskin Gulch the first time? And why do you keep coming back to it? It's a hike that you've done multiple times.
It's got to be a dozen times I've been down there. And it actually wasn't something that I thought up, because, my happy place is generally like in the mountains above tree line.
Yeah.
That's where I like to be given a choice. And so Buckskin Gulch was not, the Southwest, desert, dry canyons, like not really my thing. But I had a friend, still have a friend. At the time, Jules was the president of Pro Bar, and there's a whole story on how we became friends. But he called me up once or emailed me and said, "Hey, Glenn, there's this hike, Buckskin Gulch, that I've been wanting to do, but I'm like super busy. Do you think you could kind of plan it out? If we pick a day, could you figure things out?" And so I thought, okay, sure. Jules is fun to spend time with. So let's see what this is about. And it was tough the first year. I hate going into, there's a lot of sources now, and probably even 15 years ago, there's probably a lot of sources, but it's just trying to sift through all the information and go, okay, what is it I really need to know? And, you can look at pictures and read blog posts, but until you walk down it, you really don't know. And it was amazing. It's so unique. It's the longest slot canyon in the U.S. and some say the world. And so it's really something unique to experience because permits are limited. It's not, kind of like the Narrows at Zion where it can be a zoo with a bunch of people. So it's not crowded. And it's hard. It's a worthy thing to challenge yourself. There's obstacles you have to get through, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. But it's I call it the price of admission. The soaring cathedrals, the light playing on the swirls of reddish stone, and but there's a price of admission.
You've done it a bunch of times, and for you, this is old hat now. But for somebody who's just planning to do Buckskin Gulch now for the first time, what do you think are the best resources for them to look into?
That's a good point. There's a book, Hiking and Exploring the Paria River by Michael Kelsey. And this has a ton of information and some maps. That's a great resource. You actually use his maps for my hikes. It's not like you can get lost in a slot canyon. As long as you turn the correct way. Although I have had people... I have had people be ahead of me when we're hiking back up the Paria and turn into Buckskin by accident. So,
oh, wow. Yeah, you would think it would be hard to get lost in a slot canyon, but
It is, yeah. It is pretty hard to get lost. You really got to be working at it, but some people have that talent. So yeah, source of information. I mean, there's information on recreation.gov. For me, that book is probably, if you can find it at your library, would be a good start.
all right. And you've talked a little bit about what this area looks like. You've mentioned that it's desert and it's a slot canyon. But for those who have never been in this environment, what does this environment look like? And how verdant is it? And how much water is there? And just sort of what is the overall feel of being in this kind of a canyon?
Well, and you asked why I keep doing it. And that's one, being in a slot canyon is not the place I normally hang out. And I normally don't redo hikes. I mean, there's so many things to see out there. I don't generally do things more than once. But the reasons I keep going back to Buckskin are, one, since I've done it so many times, I can be a resource for people who are on the list and want to do it. So I can answer questions. I can tell them, hey, pack this, don't pack that. I know where there's water. I know where the hard spots are and I know where the great campsites are. I can take away that kind of unknown for people and make it easier for them to do it. And then one of the reasons I keep doing it is I get a kick out of seeing people's reactions, just watching their jaws drop as they come around a corner and they stop dead and go, oh my gosh, this is, just amazing. So that's part of the fun now is seeing people's reactions.
So let's talk about the logistics of doing this kind of a hike. This is, I would imagine, not something you'd want to do in the heat of summer. So when is the best time to do Buckskin Gulch?
So I typically aim for the last week in April. It's typically warm-ish, so the nights aren't as cold. Mm-hmm. You typically want to avoid kind of summer due to heat, and then late spring, like June, you can get the monsoon storm patterns, thunderstorms. And obviously, if you're in a slot canyon, thunderstorms are not your friend. I was just thinking of that today with the news of the flooding in Texas,
Yeah.
Kind of front of mind, I'm sure, for a lot of people right now. And then winter, I've done it once in November. And there's a reason I only did it once. I mean, it was so cold. One of the things about Buckskin is that you're wading through ice cold water. It's typically ice cold water because it doesn't see a lot of sun.
So even in April, when you're going and the weather outside is pretty good, the water's still ice cold.
Yeah, still very, very chilly. Sometimes by the end of April, it's not as cold like as the beginning of April. This year wasn't as cold, but I mean, I've hiked through and you're hiking through the water and your feet are so numb. It feels like you're walking on like frozen stubs. Mm-hmm. In November, it was super cold. So the thing about Buckskin is you're walking continuously sporadically through pools of water that are typically ice cold. They're silty, so you can't tell if they're 6 inches deep or 4 feet deep. Mm-hmm. And you don't know till you get into them.
Oh, wow.
And then when you get through Buckskin and you get out to the Paria, it's typically only ankle deep, but you're crossing it like 100 times a day. Just trail cross from one side to the other. And it's typically more clear at that point. Depends on the year. But when we did it that year in November, I've got pictures of my shoe at the edge of this icy water that you're crossing. And there was literally ice on the edge of the stream that you're crunching through every time you have to go in.
Oh, wow.
And in that particular year, we had to swim a short section in probably 30-degree water.
So you've got to have a dry bag if you're doing that, I would imagine, for your gear, or no?
Yeah, I always have a plastic bag or Mylar, in my case, bag for, inside my pack.
Okay.
That's the only year I've had to swim. I've been up to my chest other years. That's not typical. Typical, I would say, is kind of like tell people, up to your waist. That's a possibility. This year, I don't think it got above my knees, really.
So I don't want to gloss over, you mentioned the flooding possibility. For people who haven't hiked in these kinds of areas, what is the best thing they can do to make sure that they're aware of what the risks are? Is it simply just looking up online the weather prediction, or is there a specific service or ranger station they need to call? Or how do they make sure that they're not entering at a time that could be really dangerous for them?
Well, the primary is to monitor the weather over kind of a wide area.
Okay.
There are thunderstorms predicted and you think, oh, they're not in my area. It's like, well, that drains a very large area.
Mm-hmm.
You can check in with the rangers. The thing is with the rangers, there's no upside for them to tell you to go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed that.
It's only downside.
Yeah.
So, they're more inclined. I have done trips where they recommended you not go. There was one year when we actually modified the route because some of the participants were concerned about the weather forecast. And it wasn't thunderstorms, but it was some rain scheduled for the first day, I think, that we were going to be hiking. And so normally I have a hike that I do. It's kind of a Buckskin Prius sampler, I call it. We go in at Wire Pass, intercept Buckskin, go down Buckskin to Paria, and then go down Paria, and then turn around and come back out through White House. Mm-hmm. And so that would have put us in Buckskin for when the rain was forecast. And so they felt more comfortable reversing it so that we were in Paria, which is a wider canyon. Mm-hmm. There's bigger islands on the side that by the size of the trees obviously are above flood stage. And so I've been rained on a few times there. It's not the drizzle that gets you. It's the large amount of water in a small amount of time.
So the route that you're typically doing, is it Wire Pass to Lee's Ferry?
No, it's Wires Pass. I've never been to Lee's Ferry.
Okay.
So I have to get permits for 4 days, but it's basically 2 full days in the canyon.
Okay.
So the first day is picking up permits, positioning cars, and then hiking, and driving there or flying there, and then hiking like the 1.7 miles from Wire Pass into where it hits Buckskin Gulch. And then I typically camp the first night there.
I see. Okay.
So it gets us a kind of a jump on the first day. You get in there, there's no water there, so you have to, cart water with you. Mm-hmm. We often eat, either cook dinner in the parking lot and then hike in, or just pick up a sandwich or something that doesn't require water for cooking. And then the next day I hike through Buckskin, and then typically, and this is where, if people are fit enough, get all the way down to Big Spring. So that's like 16 miles, 16 and a half, 16.7, I guess.
And the thinking there is to get through Buckskin because that's not a safe place to camp, is my understanding, right? Is that the idea?
There aren't places to camp there.
Okay.
I mean, there just are not places to camp. Especially if you're a party. I'm usually like 8 people. If you were one person, you might be able to find a spot here or there. Mm-hmm. In Buckskin, you're walking under debris jammed into the canyon that's 50, 60 feet up.
Wow.
So that gives you an idea of like, well, you're not going to be that high if a storm comes through.
Right.
So you're going to be toast. And I always used to tell people no one had been killed in Buckskin, but then in 2023, they had 4 people, actually 2 people had been killed right before we went in, and then 2 people were killed after we went in. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you need to be smart about it. But, in a flash flood, it's not necessarily the water that kills you. It's the debris and stuff that knocks you out as it's carrying you downstream. So, there are places in Buckskin. There's a middle route that you could get out, but you're not going to be able to run fast enough to outrun the water. So, yeah, you don't want to be in Buckskin if it rains.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that third day then, so you've got a partial day, a couple miles in, dry camp, then you've got a full day through Buckskin. Right. And then that third day, is that your last day? And if so, where are you exiting?
So typically we camp at Big Spring because that's, always reliable water.
Okay.
And lots of it. There's other potential sources. And I've had 1 year when we didn't make adequate progress and we had to camp at the confluence, which is a common campsite, which, means you can expect mice there. And there's a fair amount of spots, but if you're a larger group, it's somewhat limited. There are some springs starting to come out, and so you could dig a hole, you can let the water settle, run it through a filter. So there's options there. But Big Spring is just like super gurgling, gushing water, easy to filter or treat or drink right out of the spring if you want. So typically we camp at Big Spring and then hike down, maybe 4 or 5 miles, and then turn around, hike back up past Big Spring, and then I hike past the confluence and through the Narrows. And then I stop at a campsite I call Big Cottonwood. It's like probably 3 miles from White House.
Okay.
So I just spend the last night there. You could hike out, but it's like, why? I mean, when you could spend another night in the wilderness.
Exactly. You've come all that way.
Yeah, you come all that way. It's another night. It's a nice campsite with, you're not in the canyon anymore. It's rolling rocks and stuff. And there's some big cottonwood tree. There's some cool little campsites up on ridges and stuff. We usually have kind of a final night. There's some down logs you can sit on as you cook dinner. And then the next morning it's an easy hike out. You reposition the cars. People can make flights home or drive if they're in Southern California, drive home that day.
How long of a car shuttle is that between White House and Wire Pass?
It's about 45 minutes between the two.
Okay, that's not too bad.
It's not too bad, no.
Other than the gear that you would normally take mountain backpacking, are you taking anything different for this environment?
People always ask about the footwear. I'm not sure I've totally cracked that. I think the best thing I have so far, I've tried kind of waterproof socks, a couple different brands, and the water always seems to get in. I have used, I think they're called the Rocky waterproof socks for the second day once we're out in the Paria. Because it's only ankle deep, so kind of keep your feet dry-ish, but then your feet sweat, so it's it keeps the silt out at least, which is nice. Usually for buckskin, just thin socks. Your feet are going to be cold. I have recently used some hollow socks. They're alpaca fiber socks, which they still get wet, but they seem to keep my feet a little warmer. So that's always a plus in buckskin.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of my current go-to. But other than that, I don't take my best. I usually hike in ultras, and they have there's a hierarchy of, I buy a new pair of ultras and they're in kind of gray, subdued color. They're typically they're for Europe hikes because you're eating at nice restaurants at night, and so you want like a nice nice-ish pair of shoes.
Yep.
And then when they're through that, I'll take them backpacking, and then they slide into kind of the buckskin because you just never get that grit out of them. So they become buckskin shoes. And when they're too tired for buckskin, then they become my dishwashing shoes because those just get super nasty. So that's kind of my hierarchy of shoes that they work through.
You're going to get the most out of them that way, it sounds like.
Yeah, get the mileage out of them, definitely.
What is the total mileage for the route you've described, roughly, if you know?
People always ask me that. And it's like, I never tell them how many miles it is. I always talk about how many hours it is.
Okay. Well, whatever works.
I'm not sure I've added it up, but so the total route is 30 to 35 miles, I guess, total.
Okay. And you've mentioned a lot of walking in water. You've mentioned Big Spring, where there's a good amount of water. How do you think about water availability in general? Is it plentiful or is it scarce and you need to be planning for it? I guess is the main thing to be thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's scarce. You're in the desert, so you're walking through water, but that would be hard water to filter because it's so silty.
I see.
I mean, you could let it settle. I've heard of people adding flocculants to it to kind of help it settle out. I've not tried that. Buckskin, as you start to get towards the confluence, you'll see springs seeping out from the side, and that water is more clear. there's definitely, you could get it from puddles on the sides of the canyon and filter that.
So we've talked about it being hard to get lost because it's a canyon, but is this more of a route or is this a trail?
There's no signs.
Okay.
It's not marked.
Okay. That's important for people to know, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's not marked, but you generally see where people have gone, especially when you get out of the Paria. And that's why the trail, you're walking on one side and then the river meanders. Mm-hmm. And so you cross over to the dry land is over on the other side. So you kind of end up crossing back and forth. But yeah, there aren't any signs down there. That's for sure.
Are you relying on like USGS maps, or is there a particular map for this region that's helpful, or app that you use, or anything like that?
I use the maps from that book that I referenced.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what I use. And that's just to, I have my own notes for like how many hours I can expect, till we get to waypoints like, Wire Pass to the Rock Fall, which is a major kind of obstacle you have to work through, and the confluence. And so I can kind of monitor like how we're doing on my typical times. So if I, need to make contingencies, like the one day it's like, okay, we're going really slow due to this one person. So we're not going to make it. We're going to have to camp somewhere else. So I can start to kind of plan ahead and make contingencies.
So you mentioned the rock fall. Is that the sort of boulder jam that you have to climb down with a rope?
Yes. Well, okay. Most of the time you have to climb down through a rope. It depends every year. And that's one of the other things about doing it every year is it's different every year. So I never know. There's parts of it that I kind of remember by now, and seem familiar, but really it's different every year because in winter, when the floods go through, they rearrange things. Mm-hmm. At the beginning, when you join Buckskin at Wire Pass, and then you join Buckskin, and then you kind of wander down, and it suddenly steepens up, and there's a spot where there's a rock jammed in Buckskin that kind of stops erosion. Well, the first year I did it, that was about an 8-inch step down. This year, it was about a 20-foot ladder.
Wow.
So, you think like nothing's happening, but I know from like spots that I've monitored, and there's another one where there's a rock jam that now is kind of like a back over and, and scoot down. But in a couple of years, that's going to be an issue. And my contact, the BLM, has said they've kind of ignored, I guess, or turned a blind eye to the ladder that's in there. But that's not a sanctioned ladder. I've been told that they're not going to allow it to be put back if it washes out. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So first that was a step down. And then for the next few years, there was like a tree that was kind of jammed in there that you could kind of use to step down. There's like a fork in the tree. And then one year that blew away and you could look up and say, oh, well, that's where the tree went. Mm-hmm. And then there was like a little sketchy ladder for a few years. And then one year, that ladder was high up in the canyon walls. It didn't make the winter. And the current ladder, it's pretty beefy and it's roped in there pretty well. So it could last for a long time. But I'm kind of curious about the next little boulder obstacle, what's going to happen there. So we'll see. But yeah, the rock fall is, sometimes you can slip down a hole, but sometimes that's full of water.
Right.
And then sometimes there's an area on the right that you can kind of scooch down that's not too steep. I've had to shimmy down next to a dead carcass of a big mountain sheep with its eyeballs bulging at you. That was an exciting year.
Well, I like the idea that it's different all the time. I recently did an episode on Havasupai, and the waterfalls in that canyon have changed drastically over the years because of the flooding. Just the appearance of them and the location of them and all of that. And so I think it's a feature of these desert canyons that you're at the mercy of nature, and it's not always going to be the same in future years.
Yeah. Which, is part of the excitement.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of the value, I think, of getting out into wilderness and backpacking is you can't control all the variables.
Right.
And you're putting yourself in a situation where certainly the potential that you have to rely on your equipment you brought with you and your skills and experience to improvise and, get out of a situation. So,
You're taking a fairly big group by most standards, and it seems like this is a competitive permit to get. What's the process for making sure you can get a permit for that for, 8 people or 6 people or whatever it is?
So currently the permits are issued on recreation.gov, and that wasn't always the case. And I kind of liked it better the way it was before, but the recreation.gov platform for this permit is a 4-month rolling release. So since I'm always going for April, and typically it varies somewhat, but typically they're released at midnight in the time zone of the releasing station. So that's an important thing you need to make sure you have figured out.
Mm-hmm.
And so usually like 10 o'clock at night on New Year's Eve, I'm not celebrating. I'm at my computer because I'm waiting to pick up the permits for Buckskin. And sometimes there'll be a notice like, hey, it's going to happen at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning or something like that. But I typically, so I'm logged into my recreation.gov account. I'm not on Safari, my usual browser. I'm on Chrome because that seems to be less glitchy with recreation.gov. I have a separate time clock on my screen up so that I can monitor like the actual time. So when it flips over, I know and I can refresh. I also have my wife on another computer logged onto her recreation.gov account.
Yep.
So that, she can nab one and hold it until like, no, I've got a confirmation on mine. You can let go of yours. So yeah, and I'm looking for, I'm usually looking for a weekend because not everyone on the list is retired. And so something centered on a weekend. So maybe Friday they can drive out, we can start hiking, then Saturday, Sunday, they're coming out Sunday, drive back. So
despite that it's all on recreation.gov, do you actually have to pick up the permit in person or do you just print it out at home?
No, you do have to pick up the permit in person. And you have a choice of where you pick it up. And for years, I picked it up at the office in Kanab, which is a nice office and has a bunch of displays and stuff. But it added to the stress because you had to be there by 5, before 5, and hope they didn't close early. And forget that Arizona and Utah are in different time zones, and it was just super stressful. So now I just pick them up in St. George. The St. George BLM office used to be in a cool spot right on Riverside Drive, I think, and then we'd kind of meet there. They had a bunch of exhibits and stuff, and they just moved this year, April, I guess, out to near the airport, which I guess is convenient if you're flying in, but it's kind of a soulless building. I mean, the BLM consolidated a bunch of their different operations, so I guess it makes sense. But, it's kind of a lobby with glass windows but you have to go there to pick up your permit. And part of the reason is that they want to issue you WAG bags.
Yeah, so explain to people who haven't, I've dealt with that in the Mount Whitney zone several times, but tell people who aren't experienced with a WAG bag what that is and how that works.
Yeah, so for people who are backpackers, you're usually skilled with digging a hole. If you're probably totally current, you're packing out your used toilet paper these days, but you're digging a hole and covering up and leaving your human waste, number 2, in the backcountry. Well, for obvious reasons, in a slot canyon, that doesn't work. Camping is concentrated in a few little areas, and it would be just super, super nasty. And so you are required to use a waste alleviation gel bag, short for WAG bag. And these things, people freak out about pooping in a bag, and I don't know why, because these things could have been designed by NASA. They're like really well thought out. They have like a outside Ziploc and then an inside bag that you pull out, you spread out. They've got toilet paper in them. They've got this gel in there that kind of eliminates the smell. You cinch up the inner bag and then roll it and then Ziploc the other way. They're really pretty easy to use, pretty foolproof. A lot of people pack one per day. I can get two poops in one bag, if you're careful. And they're really easy to use. And then they provide a dumpster on the way out of White House for you to dump the used ones in. They used to, I didn't notice they did this on my last ones is maybe because they know me now, but they used to take a Sharpie and write your permit number on your wag bags so that if they found one that someone left there, it's like
They knew who
who
was.
left it.
Yeah. Huh.
And so I'm super clear with my people. It's like, if I find out you didn't use a wag bag or you left one there, it's like, one, I will personally report you to the BLM and you were permanently off the list. I've had people just hold it for 2 days.
I wouldn't recommend that, but
I don't recommend that. No, but it's really freaks people out. But it's like, to me, you get so used to it. It's like even easier than digging a cat hole. I mean,
it's
super easy.
So let's zoom out from that lovely conversation and look at the big picture here. For people who have choices of places to go hiking all over the US or all over the world or different desert locations, why is Buckskin Gulch something that people should really consider doing?
Well, it's just so unique. You know, there's the history there. There's petroglyphs, you know, which they're just super accessible. It's not crowded. So, I mean, there's some logistics for getting the permit, but they only allow 20 people a day in the canyon. Mm-hmm. So as a result, it's not crowded in there. You know, and you can do a day hike. We usually meet people that are doing Wire Pass to White House in a day. Mm-hmm. You'd have to be super fit for that.
Yeah.
And that would be a very long day.
Are there petroglyphs accessible on the trail? And if so, are they marked on a map, or how do people know where to find them?
They're marked. I know in the book that I mentioned by Michael Kelsey, he shows general locations and pictures. There are some you can't miss when you hike in from Wire Pass, kind of right at the confluence, right before you hit the confluence with Buckskin. There's a huge kind of amphitheater where the river is kind of carved out this big alcove. And right on the left-hand side of that alcove, you can see some petroglyphs and some probably modern people fooling around with stuff, scratching stuff in. One of my favorite petroglyphs is at the middle route, which is a location where actually on the left, if you're going downstream, there's a way, which I've never actually tried, but there's a way you can get out. And I saw like a family with pretty small kids came down it one day when we were stopped having lunch there. So I assume it's pretty accessible. But at that location on the right, there's kind of this sloping slant slab of rock. And if you hike up that slab and then look out across the canyon, you can see these petroglyphs on the opposite wall.
Oh, wow.
But you can't see them from the bottom. You have to hike up to see them. So it's a cool kind of hidden petroglyph.
Are there potential mistakes to avoid that maybe you made the first couple times you did this trip that people should be aware of, sort of things that if you would advise other people not to do that you may have done on this trip in the past?
One is a mistake I made. I used to camp the first night just right at the Wire Pass parking lot till a ranger clued me in. It's like, no, you can't do that. It's like, oh, but the camping is not great there anyway. That's why I like hike in for the first 1.7 miles. It's much, much nicer camping, and it gets your little mileage in on that day. The other thing to remember if you're trying to coordinate with other people is typically there's no cell service at the trailheads. This is getting better. I know when I first started, there was no cell service either at White House or Wire Pass for sure. And recently, depending on your carrier, you can get a bar or two. But it's, you know, if you're trying to coordinate, you might want to meet somewhere else and or have a backup plan. Like, okay, if you don't show up by this time, then we meet here, or then I'm going in without you, or whatever the case may be. But don't assume having great cell service. I've carried too much water a lot, but that's probably better than carrying not enough water.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in all the trips that you've done to Buckskin Gulch, is there a particular moment or memory that stands out for you, or something that keeps you coming back? Sometimes
my groups give themselves names. Like this year's was the Bagel Brigade, which the reasons for which is too long a story, but the one where we had to shimmy past a recently deceased bighorn sheep named themselves the Fallen Sheep. And actually I think it was this year, This year we had to, this was pretty gross. We had to, one of the pools we had to go through, there was like a skull with flesh on it still of a bighorn sheep. And it was in the pool that you were walking through. And as you like stepped on it, you realize, oh, that's not a log I have to step on. That's like this dead sheep.
I understand why those memories would stand out for sure, but I guess that's probably not what keeps you coming back to Buckskin Gulch.
No, I guess the one, I took a guy once and he was so excited by all the firsts. The first time he'd drank water directly out of a spring from Big Spring. The first time he'd seen quicksand. The first time he'd been in a slot canyon. The first time he'd cowboy camped, because I often cowboy camp if it's no rain forecast. Mm-hmm. It's the seeing the looks on people's faces. Like one time when you get into Perea, it's a wider canyon, still, hundreds of feet high. As the river meanders, it creates these huge alcoves. And so we're hiking along and this guy sees this huge red stone, like in the middle of the river. And it's like, how'd this get here?
Yeah.
And then he looks up and he realizes that it fell from the top of the alcove, the bottom of which is like 100 feet away.
Yeah.
But it curves up and you lose like the sense of scale.
Right.
You lose sense of where the top is.
It sometimes feels good to feel small, right?
Yeah. No, it's hard to, the river twists so much, it's hard to get a picture with like people in it and the top.
Yeah.
And even if you can, the people are so small, you can't see them.
Well, Glenn Van Pesky, thank you so much for telling us about your hikes in Buckskin Gulch. But while I've got you, I've got a few more questions to wrap up, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What is one piece of gear you don't leave home without?
Well, probably the oldest piece of gear I had. So when we did that first Boy Scout trip with my son Brian, went down to REI and they loaded us up. I don't carry any of that gear with the exception of one thing. I have a pair of purple fleece socks that are my sleeping socks.
Uh-huh.
I haven't found anything warmer or lighter. I've experimented, but those is like my oldest piece of gear. They recently were modified on the Great Divide mountain bike route. We're doing some bike packing and we were camped at a BLM campground and it was cold and we're downhill. We wanted breakfast in Lima, Montana. And it was so cold that I cut slits in those mittens so I could stick my thumbs through them and still hold on to my handlebars. But yeah, those socks are something that are always in my kit.
What's the next trip on your list?
Next trip is doing a week in Emigrant Wilderness.
Oh, nice.
And actually this year's Buckskin trip, the Bagel Brigade, they bonded in a way no other group has really. And so they plan another trip.
That's awesome. They actually do the planning and you can just show up now.
Yeah. I mean, one of the other people had been in Emigrant Wilderness and I've been in Emigrant Wilderness a couple times. So yeah, I'm going to help, but it's not my trip. It's their trip.
I really love the Emigrant Wilderness because it's a high number of lakes per mile throughout that wilderness.
Yeah. It's like Yosemite without the permits and the crowds.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a walk-up permit.
Yep.
Self-issue if they're closed. And yeah, no, it's kind of on my list to kind of incorporate other list trips. I took a group there. Actually, a guy took down a National Geographic photographer that I took down Buckskin. He wanted to do a trip for a bunch of his friends from Maine. And so we all converged on Emigrant Wilderness and, just the looks on their faces with the soaring granite and the huge trees and the pristine lakes. Yeah, that's a special place for sure.
What is the most unexpected thing that's ever happened while you've been backpacking?
Unexpected thing. Well, I did get stuck in quicksand.
Really?
In Buckskin.
Wow.
Yeah, that's something to be aware of.
Is that serious? Is that like a real actual danger? Or is that more of a like, oh, I'm stuck, I can get out of this?
So before before a couple of years ago, it was always just a fun thing because most people like quicksand is something they've seen in old black and white Western movies.
Yeah.
And so to actually see it in live, which you will see quicksand in Buckskin. Well, more likely in Perea, typically towards the sides because you have, the springs coming up and they kind of create this negative pressure and, you can poke on it and it turns like jelly and you can, it's cool. People love it if you've never seen quicksand. But a couple of years ago, I was crossing the Perea as you do and felt myself start to sink. So in a split second, I thought, it's probably a small patch. I'll get through it when I should have quickly reversed because it was bigger than I thought. And then both feet were stuck. I could not move. We had other people bring some wood in and I was stuck probably like up to my knees, which doesn't sound too serious, but you don't have anything to haul yourself out.
Yeah, I could see that being scary. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, I had my entire pack with me, which I always, I never leave my pack in camp. If I'm leaving camp, I want to have everything that I have with me because that's everything I would need to address. So, if I hadn't had people with me, it was hard to dig myself out. It would have taken hours, I think. And you're cold, it's cold. Yeah. You're getting exhausted.
Yeah, something that would have taken hours to get out of. That's pretty scary.
Yeah. So, I have a new rule now. It's like, okay, nobody leaves camp by themselves.
Yeah, seriously. Huh.
If you're out of earshot, you go with someone because that was a new one to me. I'd never experienced that before.
All right, last question. What is the most valuable thing that backpacking or trekking or hiking in general has taught you?
Probably just the value of being uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard that answer a few times and I think it's a great one because for me, it's important too. And I always think of it as the difference between being uncomfortable and being unsafe. And a lot of people confuse the two. And it's fine to be uncomfortable, different from being unsafe.
Yeah. And I think if a lot of parents bring up kids and don't let them try dangerous things. And I think people grow up thinking that uncomfortable is unsafe. And it's like, no. Too much comfort will kill you. That's what's unsafe. You need to stretch your boundaries and find out what you're made of and be uncomfortable. I spent a night shivering in my sleeping bag. It's like, okay, well, I didn't die. And so, I obviously don't plan for that, but okay, well, I can survive a night shivering in my sleeping bag. It's not the end of the world.
Glenn Van Paske, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
You bet. My pleasure.
Thanks again to Glenn Van Paske for coming on the show. And I hope that Glenn and I have inspired you to hike Buckskin Gulch. And if you enjoyed this episode, tell a friend about it, or better yet, give us a good review on whichever podcast service you use. And keep in mind that this podcast is entertainment meant to spark your interest. If you decide to hike the trail, do your own research. Keep in mind that these episodes are made at a particular point in time, and trails and conditions and permitting requirements may have changed, so look into it before you do anything. Like anything else worth doing, outdoor adventure has risk, especially in slot canyons, as we've talked about. So when you go, pack your common sense, and when you get back, tell me how it went. Next time on Trails Worth Hiking, we'll stay in the arid southwest of the United States, though we'll climb out of the Slot Canyon and travel a multi-day steep series of connected trails in the mountains that will take us through forests of pinyon pine, juniper, and oak woodlands, but with expansive views of the surrounding Chihuahuan Desert, as we go to Texas for the first time on this show to hike the Outer Mountain Loop in Big Bend National Park. If you have any questions or feedback on this episode, or ideas for future episodes, including if you want to be a guest and talk about a trail that you've hiked, reach out to me at trailsworthhiking@gmail.com. So start planning your next hike, and before you know it, you'll be on the trail. Thanks for listening.